All right, let's jump right in. What we're about to do is crack open some recently surfaced confidential files from way back in 1933. And trust me, these aren't just dry historical documents. They tell a fascinating and frankly a pretty chilling story about political power, forced exile, and the cold calculations that decided the fate of an entire people.
You know, this quote from the person who first posted these files online just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly sets the tone for what we're about to uncover. We're talking about a situation where human lives were being discussed with this unsettling, clinical detachment.
So, at the very heart of all this are the Assyrians. They're an ancient Christian minority who, in the early 20th century, found themselves in a really tough spot. They were stuck in the middle of the brand new kingdom of Iraq, which had just been formed after the British Empire's control over the region ended. So this flag, it represents a people, a culture, an identity that was suddenly facing a huge threat.
Okay, let's get into the files themselves. The thing that's so striking when you read these documents is the language. It's so bureaucratic, so stark. It just lays bare how these high-level officials talked about the future of an entire community. It's chilling.
So picture this. It's 1933. The Kingdom of Iraq is brand new, still figuring things out after the British handed over control. But for the Assyrian minority, and remember, many of them had been incredibly loyal soldiers in the British-led forces, their future wasn't seen in terms of citizenship or rights. Nope, they were framed as a problem that just needed to be managed.
And of course, the officials had a name for it. They called it the Assyrian question. You know, whenever you hear politicians start talking about a group of people as a question, that's a huge red flag. It means the conversation is already heading in a really dehumanizing direction. This wasn't about people anymore. It was about a political inconvenience.
And don't think for a second this was all happening in secret, behind closed doors. This right here is an extract from the official minutes of the Iraqi parliament. This debate was happening out in the open, and the tone, as you'll see, was incredibly hostile.
Just listen to this question from a representative from Mosul. You can just feel the suspicion, right? The fear-mongering. The Assyrians weren't being treated like fellow citizens. They were being painted as some kind of internal threat, an armed and dangerous group ready to cause trouble.
And here's the kicker. This narrative became the official one. The Iraqi government was publicly calling for their punishment. But then you look at the secret British memos from the folks who are supposed to be neutral, and the language gets even colder. They talked about the need for the liquidation of Assyrian question. Liquidation. That's a word you use for a failed company, not a community of human beings.
So, to solve the Assyrian question, the authorities figured they had to go for the head. And that meant targeting the spiritual and political leader of the Assyrians, a young patriarch named Mar-Shamun XXIII.
And here he is. This is the man right in the middle of this political hurricane. Mar-Shamun wasn't just a religious figure. He was the main advocate for his people, fighting for their safety and their rights in this new Iraqi state. And for the authorities, that made him the biggest obstacle they had.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. This slide breaks down the British government's internal debate. This is from a confidential file in July 1933, and they're literally weighing the pros and cons of letting Mar-Shamun go back to his people. On one side, hey, maybe it would calm things down. But on the other, well, he was defiant, he refused to sign loyalty pledges. Get this, he was seen as a cuckoo in the nest, a foreign element they couldn't control.
So the Iraqi government made a huge move. They stripped him of his nationality. And this was more than just taking away a passport. It was a political weapon. By making him stateless, they completely crippled his ability to appeal to international groups like the League of Nations. Suddenly, he wasn't a citizen with rights anymore. He was a man without a country.
Okay, so with Mar-Shamun now stateless, the path was clear for the next phase, a very carefully planned exile. And the details of how they pulled this off, they tell you everything you need to know.
Just look at the language in this British memo. They're talking about the disposal of the Mar-Shamun. Disposal. The language you'd use for getting rid of garbage, not for discussing a human being. This one document just lays the cold calculation of it all right out in the open.
And this question right here perfectly illustrates their main concern, optics. It was all about how it would look. The memo debates whether they should create a special law to legally lock him up in Cyprus or just offer him free asylum. The question was never about what was right or just. It was about which option would create the fewest political headaches.
And here's what they decided. A formal detention would be, and I quote, most embarrassing.
So they went with the tidier option, a forced voluntary asylum. It gave the appearance of a choice, when in reality, there was no choice at all. The plan was to get him out of the way and isolate him, but to do it in a way that let the British say, hey, it wasn't us.
To help persuade him and make sure everyone complied, money got involved. A telegram shows that King Faisal of Iraq offered an annual allowance, £600, to support the patriarch's family. But of course, this offer came with a very big string attached.
And there it is. That money was basically a leash. It was hush money, a clear-cut case of financial coercion designed to buy his silence. The message was simple. Take the money, but give up your right to speak out for your people ever again.
The plan itself was pretty elaborate. This wasn't just about getting rid of Mar Shamoun. It was about totally dismantling his entire support system. The telegrams show them organizing Royal Air Force flying boats to move not just him, but also his very influential aunt, Lady Surma, and her entire group. The goal was total, complete isolation.
And that brings us to the ultimate goal of this entire operation, which was summed up in one of these documents with a metaphor that is just truly disturbing.
Just read that again. A British official is arguing that they shouldn't deport the patriarch too soon. They should wait until the teeth of the Assyrians had been drawn. I mean, wow. That single phrase tells you everything about the real motivation behind this policy.
Drawing the teeth. Let's be clear what that means. This was never about finding a peaceful solution or creating stability. This was about making an entire community politically powerless. It meant disarming them, sure, but it also meant breaking their spirit, taking away their leader, and making sure they could never, ever again pose a question to the powers that be.
So when you put it all together, what these files really show us is a playbook for political suppression. We see a people's fate being decided not on what was right, but on what was convenient. We see how cold, bureaucratic words like disposal and liquidation were used to cover up a massive human tragedy. And we see how stripping someone of their nationality became a weapon to silence a leader. This is the kind of story that's usually hidden away in the margins of history.
And that leaves us with one last, really important question to think about. These particular files happen to surface, but how many more just like them are still out there, buried in an archive? When the official record is written in secret, it really forces you to ask, whose story are we actually being told? And maybe more importantly, whose story is being deliberately erased?